So I'd like to introduce our speaker today, who's Marianne Bertrand. She's a professor of economics at the University of Chicago, Booth School of Business, and also serves as co-chair of JPAL's labor sector and director of the poverty lab at the University of Chicago. She's an applied microeconomist whose research covers the fields of labor economics, corporate finance, and development economics, and she's been widely published and covered diverse topics such as racial bias in the United States, affirmative action for disadvantaged castes in India, and corruption in India as well. Among other awards, she's the recipient of the Elaine Bennett Research Prize, the Society of Labor Economists Rosen Prize, and is a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. And we're really thrilled to have her here, and I hope you'll join me in welcoming Professor Bertrand.
This one? Great, thanks a lot. Thank you so much for coming. So I want to talk about some new project with my colleague, Emir Kamenitsa, who's also at Chicago Booth. So I guess the main motivation for this work, and I'm sorry, it looks like this is cut off. Is there anything you can do about it? Or you just have to guess what the titles are? You'll guess. So I mean, I think the central motivation for this work is the sense, belief people have that the US is becoming more divided over time, both politically and culturally. We can point at a very large literature in political science that has talked about the rising polarization between Republicans and Democrats, not just in Congress, but also among the broader electorate. All of the things that we've read since, kind of the last presidential election, suggest that it more than just pure direct economic factors. We separate Trump voters from Clinton voters. I mean, there's a sense that attitudes towards things like race and immigration are part of the divide. If you've seen, I think a few months ago, the New York Times had these really great graphics that was telling us what kind of TV shows people were consuming in Trump countries versus Clinton countries. And there was really a sense that people are watching different things on television from Duck Dynasty, which I've never seen. I saw 5 minutes, versus Modern Family, which I watch religiously. So is this a cause for concern? Well, there's a large literature in political economy that kind of tells us that ethnic or linguistic divide within a country is associated with kind of worse outcomes. Think about lower level of social capital, lower level of political good provision, increase in conflicts. There's more recent work that suggests that it's not just this fragmentation per se that matters, but it's really when these kind of different groups start, stop not sharing the same culture that you see rising conflicts. Some cross-country work that would suggest that. And there's lots of work in sociology, the idea of cultural capital. Pierre Bourdieu, who's a French sociologist, has talked a lot about it, which kind of suggests that indeed when this gap in cultural capital increases, it makes it more difficult for groups to interact with one another, communicate, and eventually trust each other. All of these can have kind of dire consequences. So what we do in this paper is try to kind of say something about this question as to whether the lives of the rich and the poor have become more or less similar over time. What we really wish to capture is this idea of culture, kind of trying to get a sense of the cultural distance between rich and poor. So that means questions like, are the brands of peanut butters that rich and poor are eating, are they more and more different over time? Do they, are they stopping sharing knowledge about, TV shows? Do they have gardening hobbies? What are their views about marijuana and things of the sort? So clearly, you could think about measuring cultural distance across other groups and income groups. And in fact, kind of a lot of the work that we want to do kind of following through could, plan to look at racial groups, we want to look at gender. Why, why start with, with income? Well, there are, I think, multiple kind of motivations for that. The first one is that, obviously, as we know, it's been very well documented by many people in this room. There's been, a sharp rise in income inequality in the US. We understand a lot about where it comes from. I think we still, struggling to, say more about what are the consequences of this rise in income inequality. And one could imagine that one of the dimensions through which it might have been important is that, indeed, it kind of affected the fabric of society by weakening the sense of common identity that exists across these income groups. There's also a sense that's a more general point that technology may have facilitated growing cultural divergence across income groups. We move from a world where there was just one kind of TV channel to a world where there's a lot of choices. We move from a world where you go to the supermarket, there's only one brand of yogurt, to having hundreds of brands of yogurt. So technology has changed things, and income matters there because high income may give you access to a broader set, a different set. And then finally, I think more importantly, and that's kind of really related to this kind of Bourdieu idea of cultural capital, you can think about growing cultural distance between rich and poor as being particularly important when it comes to how this could affect social mobility, right? So just two examples, think about that. Think about the first generation incoming students at MIT and the ability to blend in and succeed at MIT. Right? Well, the ability to make friends with kids that come from different backgrounds may be somewhat reduced if they don't share the same culture. I recall my experience when I first moved to the US to do my PhD, and I think the first Sunday I was asked about watching The Simpsons, and I felt like ostracized. I had no idea what people were talking about, and it was quite important that I started watching The Simpsons so that I integrated and ended up being okay. Similarly, if you think about, kind of the labor market context and the boss deciding among all the employees that they have, which one to promote, the idea that you feel more comfortable with one person, that you have, kind of better interactions at the water cooler with this person, that you had good conversations is, could be an important factor in deciding to promote this person versus another one. So I think these are, kind of the main reasons to why we're focusing on income groups. All right, so what do we do here? What do we study? Well, we're trying to put together, and the list, this is a list we have so far. I think we're still trying to kind of extend this list, a set of data sets where we can really, over time, as long of a time series as possible, measure some of these components of culture. So far, we've put together 3 data sources. 2 of them, I'm sure you're very familiar with, maybe the third one less so. So the first one is the one you might be less familiar with, is in fact it's a marketing data set that allows us to cover about 25 years. It's the kind of data set that is being used by companies when they decide, kind of where to target their advertisement to. It's the kind of, data set that's used by movie studios to try to understand kind of viewership of their movies across different markets. So a data set has not been used much by academics so far, but ended up being kind of really relevant to this project. The second thing we're going to do is we're going to look at time use. This is the longest time series we can do, going back to 1965, because of the harmonization of the time use studies in the US. And then finally, we're going to look at the general social surveys and study attitudes for 40 plus years. All right, so what is our approach? So there are many ways you can think about measuring cultural distance. I'm going to take you down one path. I'm not going to try to claim that's the only way to do it. I'll show you some other results at the very end if I have. But the way we're going to proceed, for now is basically do the following things. So take, you tell me, imagine the following exercise. You tell me in a given year what kind of movies you've watched, what TV shows you watch, what magazines you read, what you buy at the supermarket, what brands you buy. You tell me how you spend your day. You tell me what your attitudes are towards social issues. Now, how well can I guess in any given year whether you are high income or low income? Okay, that's going to be the way we're going to be proceeding for this exercise. Now, just to be very clear, we have 3 data sets. We don't have one data set. So I'm going to be able to do this exercise one at a time. Not, I don't have one data set that at the same time tells me what kind of yogurt you buy and what are your views on marijuana, right? So we'll do this exercise separately, but we have some ideas about how we can try to kind of combine the various exercises we've done so far, but I'm not going to spend any time on this. All right, so what is the prediction method? So first, let me tell you kind of how we constructed our data set. So we are focusing on people that are between 20 and 64 years old, and we're focusing on the people that are employed full-time. Well, one reason we do this is because we're going to look at time use data. It gets complicated if you have people that are employed and non-employed, but this is something that we'll examine. Before now, think about people between 20 and 64 years old employed full-time. And we're going to divide people into top and bottom income quartiles within household types. So these are the household types we consider. And then as we do this exercise, we're going to try for each data set to ensure that there's consistency of variables over time. So just why this important? You don't want to cheat. So imagine that one data set, say the GSS, has more and more questions over time. Well, obviously, if I have more and more questions in 2016 than I have in 1972, it's going to look like I can do a much better job in 2016 than 1972. So we want to have consistency of the variables over time. And we also have consistency on sample size over time. Right? Similarly, I may do much better predicting if I have a much larger data set than a much smaller data set. Okay? So how do we kind of do that? How do we ensure this consistency? So let me first tell you briefly about the MRI data. That's the data set where we're going to look at movies, TVs, magazines, products, and brands. So this data set is really meant, given again the purpose that I described, it's designed for people that sell these products, produce these movies. It's really meant to, be extensive. Is every single product, every single brand in there? I don't think so. But there, in that particular set, not going to assume consistency. The fact that a given brand of yogurt is in a data set in 2016, but not in 1972, is a real fact. It did not exist in 1972, it exists in 2016. So similarly, very obviously, the set of movies is changing from one year to the next. It would be nonsensical to try to ensure consistency. So we have about 100 movies every year. We have between 500 and 800 TV shows over time. We have about 200 different magazines, and we have between 2,000 and 3,000 different products, and close to 6,000 brands in the data that we have access to. When it comes to the time use data, there, it's reasonable to assume that there's consistency in the set of things that we can do over time, and this is the way we treat the data. The only exception is computer use, which, did not exist in 1965, but we know why it wasn't there. It was not a category. It's not like they forgot to talk about computer use in 1965. So we're going to just add it to 1965 and impose that the consumption of computer use is 0, or the time used on computer is 0 in 1965. We try to, harmonize a little bit of the time use data. So, kind of the way they ask about reading is more specific in some years than others. So we merge some categories to deal with that. In the end, we end up with 78 different activities that you can do. So again, I can't break it down, but if I try to decompose my days, typically I engage in 4 things. Like I drive, I work, I put my kids to bed, I watch TV, and I sleep 5. So 78 is pretty, it's pretty narrow. The set of activities are fairly narrow. And then one of the problems with the time use data, even though it goes back 1965, is that it's very dense in the, after 2003 because of the VLS time use data. It's less dense in the early years, and more kind of annoyingly, there's no household income variables in 3 years. So we have to drop those years. Obviously, we need household income. And then finally, the attitude data all come from the GSS. If you have spent time with the GSS, it has a core set of questions that it's been keeping consistently over time. But it also kind of, some questions come in and out of the GSS. So what we do is that try to create, in a sense, kind of the largest set of attitudes questions in the GSS. We end up doing that by sacrificing 12 years of data and having 89 consistent questions across all the years that we keep. So these are all the same questions being asked to people in every single year. All right. So just again, so it's very kind of last few slides on the technical things. As I said, we equalizing the sample size first across income groups. We use a CPS, the current population survey, to, for each of these kind of household types, assess whether they are in the top or the bottom quartile of the income distribution in that year. We have the same number of observation in the top and bottom quartile. That does not always happen because some surveys kind of oversample high income or low income, and that happens in the surveys that we use. And then we also equalize sample sizes over time. Again, we don't want to cheat by having years where we have much more data, and kind of it looks like we can that we have more. So what we do is essentially for each data set, define the number of observation in each given year as being the minimum number of observation we observe in any given year. That looks like we are throwing away data, But you can basically do this. We're going to redo our exercise, resampling across the years where we have more data, so that we actually are leveraging this additional data. All right. So in terms of the prediction approach, well, what we do is basically borrow from kind of the machine learning literature, and we are going to be using a combination of algorithm to predict top versus bottom income in every given year. So what we do is a combination of 4 different models. So we do OLS, except obviously when it comes to the brands and the products data set, where there are way more brands and products than there are respondents in our data set, and just OLS is just simply not feasible. We use lasso, we run regression tree, we run random forest. All this is done with kind of fairly standard approach in terms of regularization and tuning. And then we use this ensemble method to combine the predictions that come out of these different models. The idea of the ensemble is that you're basically going to make your final prediction as to whether someone is top or low income by using a weighted average of the predictions you've made through the different models. Again, kind of using kind of cross-validation to figure out kind of what are the weights we should give to different models. So everything I'm going to show you, kind of as I go through the results, is really focused on reporting the share of correct guesses that we obtain in a holdout sample. So in every year, we put aside 30% of the data. We run our prediction algorithms on kind of the main data set, the training data set, and everything I'm going to show you is kind of our probability of guessing right in this holdout sample. Okay, so that's kind of it for the methodology. Now let me take you through the results. So first, sorry, so this is what you cannot see at the top, is that this is just giving you a sense of what our ability to predict income is across these data sets. And these are our ability to predict in the final year in each data set, which is not always the same, but it's about 2012, 2013. So this, I think a few things that are not surprising. I'm going to focus all discussion later on predicting income quartile. We've also done all this exercise on predicting whether you are in the top half or the lower half of the income distributions. I think not surprisingly, you see that kind of we do better in predicting income quartiles than income half. That makes sense. I'm also going to show you at the very end, if I have time, some results using education. These are, so I'll take kind of one number, right? So the 64.3 in the first column for movies basically says that in the last year where we have movie watching, from the 100 or so movies that are included in the data set, by me just knowing what movies you saw in that particular year, my ability to put the share of correct guesses when I try to predict whether you are top quartile or bottom quartile is 64%. Does that make sense? So this is going to be the only metrics I'm going to use later on. So obviously, the exercise is to not just tell you what these numbers and this ability to predict look like in the final year, but really understand the patterns over time. How have these numbers changed as the years have passed? Okay. So I'm going to start with movies, TV programs, and magazines. I guess why start with those results? Because say you think about brands, the direct impact of being richer means that you can or cannot afford some brands. These are, in a sense, the closest to kind of what you want to consume in an environment where, they are really, the financial constraints on being able to watch a movie, read a magazine, watch a TV show are very minimal. Okay, so this is kind of one of the, kind of purest dimensions where income, the direct impact of income is going to be most limited. All right, so this is the first picture. So what we have here, so remember, the MRI data set covers about 25 years, going from 1992 to 2016. Each dot here is the probability of guessing right on whether or not someone is top quartile or low quartile income. And we do this exercise, again, separately every given year. So what you see is very much a flat line. There's no evidence that we are better able to predict today, right? Duck Dynasty versus Modern Family, than we were in 1992 by the TV shows people were watching. I don't have the slides that would show you the time series on the number of TV shows, but it goes up really quite dramatically. It goes up when cable comes in. There are more and more choices, yet our ability to predict whether or not someone is top income, which is 0.75, does not change over time. If you add on top of that, not just TVs, but also movies and magazines, of course, now I have more information about you. My ability to predict which of your income category is going up, but again, what you observe is essentially a flat line, no changes. Okay? So with this is that on this particular dimension, the media that you consume, the TV, the movies, and you watch, doesn't look like we've become more polarized. All right, let me keep on going. So this is the movies themselves. You've seen those already. Sorry, you hadn't seen the movies. So this is the movies. It's actually kind of, I don't know, maybe if I eyeball it, maybe it's going slightly down over time. This is the TV programs, that one you've seen already. This is a magazine, again, a flat line. Okay, so what else can we do with this? Well, so these pictures are kind of like really this black box, and it's kind of fun to go and start thinking about what is predictive and what is not. And there are, again, many different ways you could try to do this exercise, but trying to put a bit of context on getting a bit inside of the box of these flat lines. So the particular exercise we do here, and again, this is not the only one we could do, but the thought exercise is simply the following one. If you had only one movie of all the hundreds of movies in every year, right? If you only information on whether or not someone watched one particular movie, of all the movies, which one would be the most informative as to whether or not someone is top income or low income? Right? So when you look at this list, so this is the list, they are ranked. So if of all the movies in 1998, so this is kind of the first year for the movies, a middle year, and the final year, of all the 100+ movies that were kind of listed in 1998, if I had to choose one movie to be as try to make the best prediction possible, or if you were, sorry, I'll take a step back. If you had to give me, I can only give you viewership on one particular movie, and I want to do the best prediction possible, Jerry Maguire would have been that movie. The Devil Wears Prada in 2007, watch Gone Girl in 2016. Just something about this, and this is going to become, again, relevant when I start talking about brands or products. The kind of movies you should expect to see there are not going to be, okay, so let me pick one that I saw recently, like Dipan by Michel Audiard, right? So that, I'm very sure that only high-income people saw that movie. But very, very few of them actually saw that movie. So that movie in itself, even though it's only watched by white people, the fact that, by rich people, the fact that very few people saw it doesn't make it very predictive of income, okay? So when we start talking about brands, Rolls-Royce, yes, obviously only rich people own Rolls-Royce, but so few of them do. That's not the kind of variable, the kind of good that's going to be most predictive. All right?
Is the baseline probability for random guessing, is it 50% or 25%?
This is 57% for the most watched.
Guessing by chance with no information.
50%.
You get 50% right. Okay.
Yes.
Incremental.
Yep. Okay. All right. So this is TV programs. This one is interesting. I just want to make a few comments. So it's remarkable that, you see a lot of, I don't know whether it's NASCAR, I know nothing about this, but a lot of like car driving, and kind of fact they say watch is that, kind of watching, AutoWorks 200. I Googled it, I still don't know exactly what it is, but that was the most predictive thing in 1992. You see then later on, Super Bowl at the top, Super Bowl at the top. The fact it's written as watch Super Bowl, so it's meant to say that, more of the rich watch the Super Bowl than the low-income groups. What's also interesting, if you look at these various categories, is that again there's lots of sports over there, some golf. For me, this was kind of telling because I can see myself in some of these, like HGTV, Home and Garden Television. Makes it very high on the list. It's one of the most predictive shows to predict people's income in 2016. One other thing that I've not told you, we have not balanced. So why am I saying this right now? We have not balanced the data set by gender, right? And we could have done that. I think both exercises would be interesting. You could imagine, and we can check this, I think we are in the process of doing that, that part of these home and garden television is just the fact that there are more women in the top quartile of income distribution today than there are tomorrow. But again, I think it's, as I said, both exercises are interesting. If you go back to my water cooler example, the fact that there are more women that are bosses, is relevant for people that want to make their way up. Okay, so that's TV programs, and these are magazines. Those are remarkably stable. Newsweek comes at the top in pretty much all of the years that are in our data set. All right, so let me keep on proceeding. So let me now tell you about products and about brands. Remember, we have really literally thousands of products and thousands of brands in this data set. And remember, this is not a case where we've kind of looked for consistency over time. We view the data set as telling us about all the things that people could buy. Okay? This is the line. So this is the MRI consumer, by which I mean I feed to the algorithm information on all of the products people respond having consumed or bought, I believe, in the last 6 months. I feed information about all the brands of these products, and we have, again, just a flat line. If I break down into products and brands, I see, again, exactly the same flat line. So again, this tells me that just looking at the consumer behaviors, we are not more able to predict today whether people are from the top quartile of income distribution versus the bottom quartile than we were 25 years ago. You can do the same kind of exercise as I did before, and try to figure out, if I were to give you only one product of all the products people can be consuming, which one should you choose if you're trying to maximize your ability to predict whether or not someone is top income or low income. And those change over time. And I think the next slide probably will tell this even more, but you do see kind of new technologies, right? So maybe let me show you the next slide, which is brands. This one I think is kind of one of my favorite ones, right? So I think we have this tendency of thinking, iPhone and iPad, right? So you can so well kind of figure out whether someone has got income from the fact that they have not one of these Japanese kind of thing in their pocket, but actually have an iPhone in their pocket. Well, yeah, that's true. But if you go back to 2004, you had other things. People had cordless phone in their home. They were starting to penetrate markets. And you go back to 1992, well, people had VCR in their homes. So you can see, I think here, just that, we should not get caught on of the latest technology. There are waves of technologies. The rich are always on the forefront of consuming those technologies, and they come and they go. It was the VCR in 1992, cordless phones in 2004, and Apple products in 2016. There are a few other things I think that are interesting about this table. I find interesting, so I'm just highlight a few. I think Grey Poupon Dijon mustard is just fantastic. It's one of the most highly predictive variable of income. And again, so kind of it's soy sauce is important as well. I offended someone last week at a dinner. This person was telling me that she loves ketchup, which I despise, and I told her that it was a marker of low income. She really was very upset at me. And it's interesting. I mean, the Grey Poupon has disappeared, maybe because now we are spread out with sriracha and other kinds of condiments. But bottom line, we really don't see nothing. We see nothing on these particular dimensions. Now let me talk about time use. So this is the time use results. Same exercise. So remember, about 80 different time use categories. It's, as I mentioned, one of the limitations of time use data is that even though there are time use surveys here and here, there's no household income that we can use. So it's very sparse over here, but then you have the BLS data over here. It also looks like a flat line. Make sure, I said this before, we are focusing on people that are employed full time, right? And kind of this is important in terms of thinking about this. But among the full-time employed, we cannot see a difference in their time use. Now, I should stress that to a certain degree, this particular exercise is something that people have already kind of looked at, right? So Agar and Hurst have a very important paper where they've told us about time use over time, and they are, kind of stressing that time use has changed between the educated and the less educated over time, that there's a growing gap, for example, in terms of leisure. This is one of the variables that they stress. Now, just to tell you why we don't seem to find the same kind of result is that they really focused on mean differences by income group or by educational group. And indeed, if this is 1965, the first year, this is the BLS data. The vertical lines are basically the mean differences. You can see that the gaps between the vertical lines is growing, just like they found in their results. But overall, those distributions, they're still kind of pretty much on top of one another. And this is why the algorithm, they can't, kind of really see much differences in time use between the two groups. Does that make sense? All right. So now let me talk about attitudes, which is the final data set that we're looking at. And this is the GSS data. And this is the only one, really, of all the data set that we've considered so far, where it does look like we're not getting a flat line. So this is, as I said, about 80 different attitude questions. Maybe when we have the discussion, I can show you these attitude questions. I think they didn't fit easily into the slides, but I can just show them to you. But there, it looks like over time, we are better able to predict people's income based on their answers into the GSS. These are the same exercise, the one I showed you before. If I only give you one variable, to try to predict which one should you choose in terms of maximizing your chance to get it right. And you see, in a sense, quite a lot of consistency there over time. I think trust shows very high up. So you see, some kind of civil liberties type questions. Voting behavior, we struggle as to whether we want to count voting behavior. Did you vote in an election as an attitude or not? But ultimately, I think it's an attitude. That's also very high up. These would be good questions if you're trying to predict people's income. So a few more things, this is an exercise that you can, I think, most easily do with the GSS, which is the following one. Take the first year of data that you have available and rank the variables one at a time in terms of how predictive they are on their own in 1976 in terms of predicting income, right? Use this 1976 ranking. So this is going from the least useful variable to the most useful variable in 1976. Fix the order in which you are displaying these questions. And now assess in all of the years that you have available how predictive that particular questions remain, right? So if there was perfect correlation from one year to the next in terms of which variable is most predictive, you would have a really kind of regular carpet where it would be gray at the bottom and red at the top, right? This shows that there's some movements over time, but there's quite a lot of consistency. The variables that are the most important at the red remain at the top in all of the future years. There's a bit more you can do. So now that we have a data set where it looks like, kind of attitudes, kind of are diverging towards income groups, you can try to break down these GSS questions into subcategories. So the breakdown that we have is that we have a set of questions related to marriage, sex, and abortion, one theme. We have a set of questions relating to civil liberties, life and trust, confidence, how confident you are in, kind of set of things, law enforcement, should cops be beating up black people on the street, politics and religion, attitudes towards government spending. Is government spending enough on X, Y, and Z, okay? And what we did here is essentially, kind of running the same algorithm as I showed you before, but only using one subset of these GSS variable at a time. And then This gives you the predictability you can have with each of these subsets in those 3 years. And this is basically kind of running, kind of a regression to figure out whether there's a trend or not. So linear regression. Regress the predictability of income-based answers to question about marriage, sex, and abortion over on year. And what's depicted here is just first, is the slope positive? And what's the statistics, or what are the standard errors on the year coefficient? And so they are ranked by size of coefficient, and you can see that you have a positive slope across all of the categories, but the trend line is only significant for the first 3 groups. So I guess the best way to read this is that among all these GSS questions that we are asking to people, it's really on this attitude towards marriage, sex, and abortion, civil liberties, life, and trust, that the high income and the low income have grown more part over time. When you look at attitude toward government spending, in fact, kind of predictably is really not changing over time in a way that's meaningful. You even have, kind of extrapolating on the linear trend, a linear time trend. All right, so in a sense, this is our paper so far. This is kind of putting all of our data set together. Obviously, we'd love to have that super data set that has all these questions at the same time, right? The algorithm may find other associations that we can just simply not give to him, right? So Duck Dynasty versus attitudes towards legal abortions, or kind of we cannot look at those type of interactions because the data sets are separated. But across those data sets, you essentially see flat lines except for the GSS that is trending up. All right, so just a few things, and I'm about ready to to conclude. We have so far done this exercise for education, as we are very well aware of. One of the main drivers of the rise in income over time has been whether or not you are educated. We get pretty much the same story, but there are there's some patterns here. I think, for example, the time use data is doing something slightly different that I want to try to understand better. You see the upward slope in the GSS, but it doesn't look as as steady. But overall, my view of this is that the education questions does not give us a dramatically different answer than simply breaking people down based on their income. Now, just opening the door to the fact that our approach to measure cultural distance, this kind of like prediction method, is not the only approach to do this. This is one of the many other approaches we have taken, which is simply kind of taking the average of the absolute difference between the mean response for rich and poor across the data sets. You can do that. That's another metric of distance. I think quite remarkably. So what's harder with this is that, unlike the other one where the y-axis is very meaningful and you can compare across data sets, it's harder to relate, the metrics that you get across the data sets. So this has been normalized. But the bottom line is that you again get essentially flat lines under this alternative metrics. All right, so let me just conclude with what I feel like we've learned so far from this exercise. I think the first main lesson is that we do not observe any measurable trend in the gap in cultural capital as we have defined it between rich and poor over time, except when it comes to attitudes. Now, what do we do with this, right? So if I had a result that was like, nothing moves, well, I could be more, forceful. Now it's, the fact that we have this kind of mixed finding makes the implications quite trickier, particularly in an environment where I don't know how, to weigh different aspects of life. The fact that we are disagreeing more on views about sex and abortion, that's maybe more important than the fact that we are consuming different brands of yogurt. But again, it sounds like it should be, but maybe not. So really just, kind of that we have to be very agnostic about. But to me, I think it is still remarkable. I must say that as we got into this exercise, this is really not what I expected we'd be finding. It is still remarkable that, we are finding that indeed in light of an environment where, in terms of income, these groups are very much diverging. I should say something that, if you think about the value of this cultural capital as really being about, we can communicate, kind of we're sharing the same language. And then we can ultimately, trust each other. You could say that our results should be, in a sense, kind of put in light of like other studies on the rise of income inequality. For example, the work that has shown that as income qualities increase, we have more and more residential segregation with richer people living in some neighborhoods and poor people living in other neighborhoods, right? So one could say, well, what's, kind of who cares if we're still speaking about the same language? Because our chances to actually interact with one another have gone down over time, right? And then finally, let me tell you where we're going next. So as I said, we are on the lookout for other data sets where we could, do this kind of exercise to try to have as rounded of a view of culture, even though we feel like we've already have, many of those dimensions. One of the data set in particular that, we are working on right now is that we're looking at the way people name their babies. Let's do the same exercise. We are, I think, as I said, the focus on cultural distance between income group, I think is well motivated, but there are other groups you could be looking at, race and gender, urban versus rural divide, all of these, are basically just pushing the button because it's exactly the same exercise with, the normalization of sample sizes. That's the main part. And then finally, I think, where I think we're going next with this is that right now we're doing very much this supervised learning. What we'd like to do next is something that's much less, that is unsupervised. And let the data speak, right? So let the data speak about what clusters emerge in the data, and let us say, if we are becoming more divided, what are the markers, what are the dimensions of us, of our socioeconomic background that are, driving this diversion, rather than imposing one particular dimension. So that's kind of where we're going, and I believe that's all I have. Yes?
On a philosophical level.
That's not a good start for me. But go ahead.
So you're reporting test errors, but test error can always be decomposed into bias squared variance and the Bayes error of the classifier. And it's really this third term that you care about, right? What is the irreducible predictive error? Because we're kind of saying that if that is big, then cultural distance is small. We only believe that test error is a reasonable estimator of this third term if the first two terms are negligible, which would only be the case with some kind of deep learning, in my opinion. So first I'm wondering, would you agree with that characterization of the methods? And second, then why aren't we using this kind of deep?
So can you just tell me more? So again, I think you are way beyond me. So tell me, maybe just turn the question around. How would you do this? How would you do this differently? I'm sorry, I think it's a cheap answer, but it's not an answer. It's basically turning the question to you. Just tell me practically how you would suggest we go at this. I think you have a sense of our constraints. You have a sense of the data that we have. I think you have a sense of the question we're trying to ask. So what could we do differently?
We do, well, simplistically,
That's okay.
use a classifier that we're more confident in, so something like a deep neural net, maybe some additional structure as well. But I guess I'm more trying to question our definition of cultural distance here as the Bayes error. My own feeling, and the reason why I'm asking this question, is that cultural distance shouldn't be defined.
Okay, but again, so how just help me out in terms of how differently you would define it. Okay, all right. Yeah, go ahead.
Maybe it's very clarify. So
Yep.
maybe you could talk about the difference between your approach, which is a prediction question,
Yep.
versus the other approach you gave about the difference in means.
Yes.
Right. Those seem like the difference in means of leisure hours versus the prediction. Those seem like two very different.
They are different.
Metrics.
They are different metrics, but I don't know. I'm not quite sure.
One way to think about it is why do you choose the prediction metric as opposed to sort of these difference in mean consumptions, for example?
Yes.
Maybe that's one way of thinking.
Okay, so that's I think we really got into this and kind of thinking that we had the kind of data sets that were just so large in terms of the number of of things that we knew about people that we thought these methods kind of made sense. Maybe another way to think about it, if you think about the difference in mean exercise, right, the vector difference, and go back to the time use data, right? So that exercise is closer to the way Aguiar and Hurst have been looking at these questions, basically saying I'm going to take the average for the rich, the average for the poor, and look at this difference in means. It's kind of like, as we do this exercise, assuming that this distribution that I showed you in the time use data, basically saying that distribution is not interesting, it's not relevant, I want to ignore it. I want to reduce the rich people to their mean. And so that's, as I think about these two particular exercises, that is certainly one differences. So that when I, the exercise that we do is really kind of very much affected by the fact that if I look at the time use or the leisure time for the rich, it's not a very, kind of narrow distribution. It is this kind of wide thing that overlaps a lot with the poor, but that there's difference in means. So, I mean, that's, the particular, I can answer the question in that particular context. I kind of understand what we do. That's quite different in these two exercises. But I have really a way, and maybe I certainly will try to learn more, to think about, kind of what would be the right, the right metric, whether one dominates the other one. Some of the work that, kind of that I mentioned at the very beginning, the work that Desmet and Romain Warziak have been doing, kind of use another measure of cultural distance. I mean, I can throw this one at the problem. It's easy for me to run that other distance. I don't know where I stop. I don't have a good, stopping point. But I'll think more about the differences across those metrics. It sounds like it's important. Yeah?
Something that I was curious about, it actually came to me when you were talking about that there were communist books and racist books in the library.
Yeah.
And the rich.
Make sure, maybe like as we talk, I can show you some of those. So these are the attitudes questions. Go ahead. This is one half. The other half is over here. But go ahead.
Yeah, so I was interested if within the rich you would both have these progressive professionals and conservative businessmen, and maybe it'd be really interesting to see if conservatives, like in different income groups, moved in similar ways. Like they actually got more different than the progressives within the income groups, and maybe there's something about them canceling each other out. I thought that would be something.
No, that would be very interesting to do. I mean, I would love to redo this whole exercise, kind of using, kind of conservative versus progressist as the variables that we want to explain. One of the constraints is that, for example, the MRI data, which is kind of central to the exercise, does not ask about political views over a long time period. But yes, that would be nice to try to kind of dissect, kind of go more inside about what's going on. David.
I wonder, when we think about splitting by income, when you're talking about low-income quartiles, you could be both talking about low-income minorities and low-income whites, and they actually be extremely heterogeneous.
Very much.
Another divide that might be informative would be there, if you could predict, and you mentioned this, urban versus rural.
Yep.
And I think it's possible, certainly argue that there's been much greater divergence.
Yep.
That would be.
So that one is certainly on the list. I think we still have to figure out with, particularly this MRI data set, which is central, whether they're willing to give us a kind of geocode that would us to do that, but I'd love to be able to do it. The other thing I would say is kind of repeating what I said before. So we struggle a lot with this point of like, these groups are becoming more diverse over time. I mean, kind of, there are more Hispanics now in the lower income quartile than there was, kind of 25 years ago. It's very easy for me to kind of try to redo the exercise just for whites, and that would be interesting as well. We felt that this kind of change in demographics, race, gender within those groups, we wanted to keep it in. I give you one rationale for doing that, but totally,
Well, one thing about rural-urban is it's very relevant for voting, right?
Yep.
Because our democracy is geographic,
Yep.
And rural areas are hugely overrepresented in their weight.
No, totally agree. Totally agree. It's on the list. Yeah.
Sort of related to what Ronald asked earlier. I mean, one issue with this, and maybe this is sort of partly an answer, one issue with doing this prediction exercise is that you're going to always have this bias where you're worse at predicting than if you knew the true coefficients of the model. It seems like one way to get at that would be figuring out what that bias is you can do this approach of like jackknifing. So you like split your data set in half and then see in the smaller data set versus the full data set, as I change the n, what's the change in how accurately I can predict, and that can allow you to at least try to debias your.
Got it. So we could certainly do that. But again, so the one thing I would stress, I totally understand what you're saying, that the way we tried so far to kind of protect ourselves from these kind of things is that we are keeping the sample sizes exactly the same in every single year, right? So there's variation. Some of these data get bigger, so we are constraining, the number of observations every single year to the minimum number of observations. So that's a bias that we were very worried about, because the more data I have, the better I'm going to be at predicting. All of our analysis is kind of like very much cleaned of that. But I see what you're saying, and we could try to figure out how much it matters. That would be yes, yeah.
Are you worried about the fact that your sample is only kind of full-time employed, 18 to 65? There have been like major changes in female employment and like long-term unemployed people.
Yeah.
Towards kind of the bottom quartile. is it possible that that those effects are masked because you're only looking at people who are fully employed?
You know, so I totally understand that by putting this constraint, I have in the time use data more women today than I had in 1965, and it's a bit like the same answer as I gave before, right? So I feel like that it's still an interesting exercise because if I go back to our ability to communicate, if who makes the top quartile is different now in terms of gender composition than 65 years ago, that's just a reality. So it becomes kind of, we could, many part of this exercise, there's no reason not to redo them on, putting everybody, not just the full-time employed. The time use analysis, I think, was the main reason why we got down kind of this rabbit hole. It just becomes really hard to think about time use if you mix people that work that do not work. So. Anything else? Yeah.
In looking at the difference between the lives of the rich and the poor, I can't help but think of health. And I was wondering if you considered any of the health surveys, like the behavioral risk factor survey.
Great idea.
That tracks it tracks participation in behavioral risk factors like smoking, unsafe sex, things like that.
Yes, we have not, and we should. That's a great suggestion. Yeah.
Just speaking to the first sentence of your title, a lot of what people have been wondering about in terms of the divergence between classes is things like marriage and life expectancy.
Yeah.
So I don't know how much you get at this.
Yeah, and so obviously, kind of you can contrast what we're doing here with the work that Charles Murray, has been doing, where Sansi goes after similar questions, kind of constraining, the kind of dimensions of life that he's looking at. We could add those, saying we could add those dimensions to our analysis, marriage is one thing, can I better predict over time whether, we could do all that. Our goal was really to be kind of closer to this point about culture, and it's a fuzzy definition to fit that, that naturally. Yeah.
Just to add some comments on the machine learning approach.
Yeah.
I found it a bit unusual to sort of average the test error. From a machine learning approach, you want to take part of your data and fit the model as best as possible.
Yeah.
And then take that one model and evaluate how good the test data is there.
Yeah, this is what we're doing.
So you're not taking the average across the 5. So you've got 5 different approaches.
Yes.
OLS.
Yeah, and so kind of within the test samples, then we basically kind of decide the weights that we want to give to each of the model. That ends up being our prediction, which we take to the holdout sample.
Okay.
Yes?
Yeah, I haven't seen that before in machine learning, but that's it.
Yes, sir?
So I don't know if it's very precise, the question, but so now you're trying to predict who is rich.
Yes.
And did you also predict who is poor?
Hold on, I'm not quite sure. So why is that going to be a different?
Oh, because possibly it becomes difficult to predict who is rich because the rich are becoming also increasingly unequal within the rich. So
So we just have a 0. So we just have a 0-1, whether you are top quartile or bottom quartile.
top quartile.
Bottom quartile. So right now the whole.
The middle is not.
Yes. So sorry. So the exercise that I showed you, there's another exercise that basically keeps all of the data and does 0-1, bottom half, top half.
Yeah.
What we're doing right now is basically taking the middle out and keeping, those two groups.
So then let me re-ask the question. So suppose you tried just the bottom quartile against the rest, or the bottom.
Yes, we could totally do it. That would be interesting as well.
I wonder whether with the we're comparing the rich with the
Yes.
rich versus the non-rich.
Yes.
So the rich themselves also are like maybe there are many more good and maybe there is many more.
Yes.
You said about the Rolls-Royce not being. A very good predictor.
And again, let's be very clear. So sorry. So first, thanks for I now realize I didn't say this explicitly. So the way we approach the data in the exercise that's about the top versus bottom quartile is that I put you in one of these two quartiles. If you're not in one of those two, you are out of the data and I don't analyze you. The part where we do top bottom half obviously uses everybody, and the results are essentially kind of the same. We have not done the exercise of basically predict whether they're top quartile using the entire data set, and we could certainly do this exercise. Also, I would love to do this exercise, kind of going beyond the top, 25th percentile. I mean, as we know, the phenomenon of increasing common inequality has been, has been there between the 25th and 75th percentile, but we also know there are some, kind of much more kind of extreme dynamics that are happening at the very top. I think there we are really struggling with data constraints more than anything else, just the precision of the income questions in most of these data sets. But we could certainly do top quartile versus the rest, and that would be a nice exercise. Or bottom quartile versus the rest.
Bottom quartile has become, especially if you took bottom white quartile, maybe they've become more homogeneous.
No,
I don't know.
that would be great. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, it's 4 o'clock. Time for tea. Thank you.